This tape involves from pre-October 5th of 2014, and it involves the Baptist Church on 1105 Horseshoe Lake Road. I'm making this tape as a testimony to the Lord as to how that things to men are impossible, but with God all things are possible. I'm Charles Pratt. I was pastor for a period of 4 years, and in those 4 years I saw the hand of God work in such a way that it was totally unbelievable. And I want to record this so that the church has a history of it. I was approached by the director of missions of the Southern Baptist Church for Northwoods in 2014, around July. And I was told that a church was open and that he needed somebody to take the church. And I had retired from the ministry, and I refused on first request. And then he called me back, and he was doing that about every couple of days for a short period of time, and kept saying, I need somebody to take this church. And I kept refusing, and finally he said, well, can you at least go on Sunday and preach a service and get an opinion and let me know what you think? Excuse me. So I called after I had preached the service, and I told him, I said, you got a problem. And he said, I understand that. Some of the background, the church had went through a rough spell and was at that present time was running about 12 people. And they had a mortgage on the church, and there was some problems with the city, and the DOM was aware to a degree, and I was aware to a degree, but not to the full extent. And so I went to the church for the one Sunday, and then I agreed to 9 weeks after that. And during that period of 9 weeks, God began to deal with my heart and to change my heart for the church. I was approached by one of the people in the church about putting up a new sign. And I said, certainly, because they were willing to pay for it. And so I talked to the sign maker, and he in turn called the city with his specifications and such. And the city told him, absolutely not, you don't touch that sign. And so that report was given back to me, and I called the city and I talked to the development director, and I said, I understand that we have a problem, and I'd like to come and visit with you to see if we can maybe straighten it out. So I went to his office. When I got in the office, they directed me to a room all by myself. And so I went to the room and I sat for a while, and pretty soon, not one person, but 4 people came in the room. They shut the door behind themselves and locked it. And it was told to me that there had been notification sent out that they had wanted to see the church inside. It was not allowed. That the parking lot was supposed to be finished at the end of 2 years. It wasn't. And when notification was sent out, it effectively was ignored. And so we were talking multiplied thousands of dollars. And I asked the panel, I said, is there any chance we could do this over a period of time? And he said, quote, if we gave you a day, it wouldn't get done. If we gave you a week, a month, a year, 10 years, it still wouldn't be done. So no, you've got to do it right away. Well, knowing that that was impossible for the small church, I asked for leniency, and they weren't in any humor to give it. So I said, well, will you do this? Will you give me until, I think it was October. And I said, if I can't do it, then I'll be honest with you and I'll come and tell you. So they agreed to that. Well, it came October and we couldn't do it. And so I went in, I took one of the members of the church in with me, and I had went to ask them if we could worship in the church until it sold, because it's the only option that we had. And so we talked about it, and I asked the people, I said, well, you know, we can either go talk to the bank and give it up, we can sell it, we can, you know, there's any number of options, but the city's not going to allow it to keep going like this. So one person suggested that we keep the church open, that we do the best that we could. So I went back in, I talked to the city, and I told them, I said, I don't know what you guys plan on getting out of this. I said, the community is not going to be any better for it. Our church is not going to be any better for it. And I said, so one last time, I'm asking. And one of the men began to write. And he said, you know, maybe we could do this in sections. And I said, thank you, Lord. And so they sent me a chart of the days that we had to finish, or the time we had to finish it. And so it was still, in my mind, an impossible task. But I thought, we will try. So what they did is they sent me not only the script of what was said, but sent to me a 4-stage plan to finish it up. And so the first stage involved the sidewalk, which had to be done immediately, and that was over $5,000. And at the time, we had a little more than that in the church account, but very little. And so we had the sidewalk put in. Then by spring, the following spring, by June 30th, we had to put in the handicap zone with striping and bumpers for the cars and the handicap signs and the asphalt and the whole concrete curbing and the whole works. The estimate that was given to me was for both was around $10,500, for which we didn't have any of. And I had talked to state officials and I had talked to anybody I could get my hands on about help to getting this going. And honestly, other than the DOM, there didn't seem to be a whole lot of interest. And so we started putting together garage sales, and we had bake sales, and we had every kind of a thing you could imagine. And we raised, for a small group, a lot of money, but it still was nowhere near what we needed. And so the time was coming to hand, and it was the 1st of June, and we needed I believe it was $520 to finish the first section. And so we raised at a spaghetti feed $500, and one of the folks came up and asked me how much we'd made, and I told him. And they handed me a $20 bill and said, let it not be said that we didn't get it done. And so the month progressed, and we came to the end of the month, and we were getting very close to the end. And the sticker is that when the estimates had been given, it was without groundwork. It was just the price of the asphalt, pouring the asphalt and the curbing and such. And so the day came, and they began to lay the asphalt. And when they got the asphalt down, I was waiting on the bill, and I was knowing that the groundwork was going to run at least $1,500, maybe $2,000. And there was an extra piece that had to be put in concrete and so on and so forth. And I thought, Lord, what am I going to do now? And it came the time, and when I got the bill, it was just for the asphalt and the concrete, just as it had been quoted. And so basically what the contractors had done is furnished what we were short and never charged us for it. At a later date, I went back and talked to one of the contractors, and he told me, I did it this time, but I can't do it again, which I didn't expect. I didn't expect the first time. But after that, miracles, it was almost like people just came out of the middle of nowhere. And so here's what took place. We got the sidewalk in that fall. In the spring, we got the handicap zone. And oh yeah, by the way, the man who did the striping came and striped the parking lot and didn't charge us a dime for it. And none of this had been asked for. It was just something that I will always believe it was a provision of God. Let me give you a little background on the church. The church at the lowest point was running 5 people, other than my wife and myself. And we had this huge thing in front of us and had no idea. And most of our folks were in their 70s. And so it was an impossible detail as far as I was concerned. But God managed to use those people and to use people that I had never heard of before. And so there came a wonderful outpouring from heaven itself. And we were facing at the beginning not only the multiplied money involved in the parking lot, but the kitchen cabinets were all pulled down. There was nothing in order in the kitchen at all in the dining area. And we had, like I said, at one point we were down as low as 5 people. And we also had a $30,000 lawsuit against the church. And so it was nearly impossible in man's figures, but God managed to make a way for us. Dave? So now, from this point on, we were just hanging. We had no idea. In the second stage, we had to put in a driveway, or third stage actually. We had to put in a driveway in front of the church and leading off from the street, which was $17,500. Well, we continued raising money the best way that we could, and we finally came up with the money to at least have a hope. And I got a call one night from Texas, from Tyler, Texas, and the mission director said, we have decided. They had came earlier and visited several churches in the Northwoods area. He said, we've decided in the church to send a mission team. And so we gladly accepted, and he said, I want you to write a list of everything that you need done in the building, and he said, and don't hold back, put everything down you can think of. Make it a list that's absolutely impossible to do. And so I sent him a list, and I waited a little while, and what he was going to do is have us buy materials so that when they got here, they had something to start with. Well, we didn't have any money to buy materials. And lo and behold, one day I went to the post office, and there was a letter from Tyler, Texas. And I looked at the letter, and inside was a check for $1,000. And I had no idea what I was supposed to do with it, so I called, and I was told that the money had been taken up to help the mission team come up here. And instead, they all decided to forfeit that money and send it to the church so that we could buy materials with it, which provided a great opening for when they came. Now, when these folks came, we were expecting young people. We were thinking people in their 20s or even teens, youth group. And instead, when they got here, it was people our own ages, people in their 60s, 70s. And they came to church service on Sunday morning, and their pastor preached that morning service. And they came back to night service, and pastor told me that Monday morning that they'd get started. And I could take this on forever. But the crux of the thing is that they started work. They put the kitchen cabinets back up, repainted them, positioned them, put hardware on, put new tile in the kitchen floor. They put up trim boards. They painted. They went totally out of their way, and they were here for 5 days. And in those 5 days, they literally changed the face of the church. Now, that in itself was a miracle, because you couldn't believe the mess that was there. And when they got to the end of the week, we were having a common meal between our church and Texas. So when we finished with the meal, I stood up and I started to thank them for all that they had done, and I did it with heartfelt thanks. And it was, just as a side note, it was funny because one of the ladies from Texas said to me, Pastor, oh, I just can't wait till Sunday morning. I won't be here, but she said, to see the faces of all the people. And we had almost 100% turnout for this endeavor. And being from a larger church, they couldn't conceive how that could be the entire church. Then my church was saying to me, Pastor, I thought these folks all went to the same church. I said, they do. And she said, well, how come some of them don't know each other? And I laughed. I said, because their church is of a size that they may not, personally get to know one another. And so anyway, we were finishing up the lunch, and I had begun to thank the missions team. And when I got finished, the mission director from Texas stood up and said, oh, and by the way, he said, we want to thank you for the opportunity that we've had to help, to give strength. And we've been blessed by God. And he said, and by the way, before we leave, he said, I thought I would tell you that our missions decided to pay for your entire driveway. And it hit me so hard that I began to weep. I just cried like a baby. The pressure was unbelievable. And he said, if you can get me a bid in the next hour. And I said, brother, you watch my smoke. and went in the office and immediately got bids from both contractors. And I was thinking, because of the previous thought that it would be about $15,000. Well, I had told the missions director that, but it came up, it was $17,500. And a week after they went home, they sent us a check for $17,500. And I was able to get the contractors to come and pour the driveway before the end of the season. Now, some of this, I'm having to jump back and forth because there were miracles that were taking place all around us. In the meantime, I wanted to list a few of those before we continue. I got a check in the mail one day for $500 and a note attached that gave the man's name, and it said he likes to help churches that he thinks are going to further the gospel of Christ. And it gave me his name. And enclosed also was a note from the man himself. And we had been recommended by a person that I had never heard of. I never heard of the man who recommended us, never heard of the man who gave the money. It's a lengthy explanation, but no way I could get a hold of him. I did send him a thank you card and the appreciation. We had some neighbors across the way from the church who wrote a check for $250 and gave it to the church for the building fund. We had more money come in from down in Texas. We had, and there's too many to even mention, Northwood's missions department sent us money, and Eagle's Nest Church, and I could go on and on and on. But little by little, the money was beginning to come in, and the whole time we were still doing the work that needed to be done a little at a time, and we were gaining a little bit of money. But our next project was $21,500, and it was the parking lot itself. And we had nowhere near that amount of money. And so one Sunday I was preaching, and it involved Mark 10:27, with men things are impossible, but with God all things are possible. And just struck me, and in the middle of nowhere, I said, "Oh, yes, he can." Denoting the fact that maybe for us it was impossible, but for God it was nothing. And with him, all things were possible. And the idea came to get some t-shirts made that said, "Oh, yes, he can," Mark 10:27 across the front, Grand Rapids Baptist Church on the back. And so the idea took birth, and then I'll get back to that in a little while. The lawsuit that I spoke of earlier, it came to court, and the man who had brought the lawsuit didn't show up. And so it was dismissed, and then it was refiled again, and he didn't show up the second time. And so after the second time, the judge threw it out of court. It was frivolous anyway. It was something that he had volunteered to do and then tried to charge the church for it. And so we had seen these small and large miracles begin to happen a little at a time. One Sunday morning, the offering was taken, and in the offering was 2 checks that amounted to over $8,000 for the building fund. And the more time that went on, the more excited that I became. And I kept telling folks, don't be discouraged. Trust God because He's able to do anything. Lean on God. And one night, in the middle of the night, when I wasn't able to sleep because the pressure was on of trying to get this done, and I came to a point where I literally laid under the covers and sweat. I said, Lord, what am I going to do? How can we go any further? And my wife, I was telling her what I was feeling, and she said to me, she said, you know, there comes a point where you've done everything you can do, and you're just going to have to trust God. And she turned over and went back to sleep. And I thought, Lord, I'm supposed to be the guy who's got the faith. I'm supposed to know. But I said, thank you for giving me a wife who knows my heart and who knows the heart of God. It was a wonderful thing, and it changed my life from that point on. I quit worrying, directly worrying. I wanted to see it accomplished. After the first year passed, I had a preference vote because I was never officially made pastor. I was an interim. And I got 100%, and so I went for another year and went for a third year. And when this all accumulated, it was the same Sunday that I had started the 4 years before. But in all of this, I came to know and to love the people and got closer and closer to them as we went through this terrible time of lack and never understanding totally, I don't think any of us, how that God had an endless supply. And it was not a problem for Him. We made it more of a problem than it really was. But we did not have the proper frame of mind. All right, in the third section, we had to put in parking stalls for as many people. Actually, originally it was put in the plans for 140 parking, or for people, for 140 people. Now that's 3 stalls, or 1 stall, for every 3 people in the church. The city did agree to allow us to put in just as much parking lot as it took to get us through until we got more people. Well, when the third section was put in, there was put in enough parking area for up to close to 70 people. And our church, I don't think the church has ever ran over 70. I may be wrong in that. But it was a blessing because the city allowed for us to get to that point where we could go ahead and do what we needed to do. And so the third section was coming up. It was $21,500, and we had very little money to start it with. Well, the church in Tyler, Texas, sent us a check for $5,000, the same one that had paid for the parking lot, that had sent people and so on and so forth, and they presented it to us. Well, they didn't come, but they sent it through our director of missions. He presented me with a check of $5,000. And so the church then was up to a point where that $5,000 took us actually about $15 over what we needed to do that parking lot. Well, in the meantime, we had an old septic system that had been outlawed by the county environmental agency. And so we had to put in either a new septic tank or we had to put in a storage tank. And so the storage tank was the cheaper route. And so we began to try to figure how that we could get that done, because the county had already extended a year to us, and I had to have it in by fall because that's what I had promised. Well, we were getting very close and didn't have enough money to finish that up. Well, we had managed to have enough in the church account, and between what people had given and money we had raised, and the same church in Texas sent us $1,000 to put toward that septic system. Well, to make a long story short, the septic tank was put in time. The third portion of the parking lot was put in time. And everything was finished to that point, to what was required of us. All of it on time, all of it with the help that came from literally everywhere. And God had provided a way for an impossible situation that many to begin with and voiced, it's impossible, Pastor, can't be done. But we had a good, faithful director of missions who pursued everything humanly possible, including his own giving, his own help to the church. And he did tell me at one point, he said, I won't leave you out here alone. And he didn't. He fulfilled his word, and I will forever be thankful. And people have a tendency through this whole thing to glorify me in some way, and I had nothing to do with it except just plain stubborn will, believing that God could. And beyond that, it was the people, it was God, it was the people who listened to God. As I go here, I may get a little out of context, but I want this recorded so that the church, at some point, if it ever hits a hard place, can know this for a fact. that we got a letter in the mail, and I'm purposely not mentioning names because I don't want to forget anybody. I don't want to bypass anybody, and names may not be desired, and so, but these are real people. We got a letter from a person in southern Minnesota with a check for $250. Now, this person is a self-proclaimed atheist who does not believe in God, but felt compelled to send a check for $250 to put toward the parking lot. Now, there are things I would take 6 tapes to tell all of it, but I'm talking miraculous things that didn't even, jive, what made no common sense. But with God, it was possible because God knew people's hearts everywhere. He knew where they were, what their capabilities was, and what they could do and could not do, and what was made possible. But now I'm going to jump back and forth a little bit. When the septic system was being put in, I had promised my wife I was going to take her on a trip, and bless her heart, she gave more than her share, because what hurt me hurt her, and what caused me grief caused her grief. And I'll be forever grateful for her trueness of heart, for her love of God. And I had promised her I'd take her on a trip, and we went out to the Rocky Mountains for just a few days. While we were out there, there was a phone call, and it was one of my lead men. I hate to put titles because God knows the titles, but he called and told me, he said, "Pastor," he said, "I thought you might want to know that the septic system is officially in." And it was such a miraculous thing that we had came from nothing, from so far behind, and managed to get all this done within 4 years. Well, I had talked to the people about those T-shirts, and I made the statement on Sunday morning. I said, when we finish this, I said, I want us all to wear our T-shirts that day, as many of you as buy them. And I said, I'm going to go out in the parking lot and get on my knees, and I'm going to pray. And when we got home, my wife said to me, she said, "Did I hear you right that you were going to get on your knees and pray?" And I said, "Yeah." And she looked at me and smiled, and she said, "How are you going to get up?" Well, I was telling one of the men about that, and he told me, he's a great big fella. He told me, he said, "I got your back, Pastor." And he doesn't know how true that rang, "I've got your back, Pastor." I thank God for all that happened. Came the day of the dedication. I went out by the sign, and I knelt on the asphalt, and I put my hands on the ground, and I worshiped God with everybody in attendance standing around. And it was such a blessing because I had seen the hand of God work in my old age. I was not able to do any of that, not physically, not mentally even. There was no way that I could have accomplished. But people gathered around while I prayed and prayed with me. And that was the last Sunday. No, it was the first Sunday in the month of September. Second Sunday, I'm sorry. In September of 2018. And we prayed and we dedicated. And the ladies prepared a meal. And so when the time finally came that I resigned from the church, the outpouring of love was amazing from the people. And they presented me with a plaque with my favorite scripture verse out of Isaiah 40:31, verse 31. They that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They'll mount up on wings as eagles. And I want you to know that no matter how bad things may look, no matter how unsteady they are, always remember that the hand of God is always there. The ability of God is always there. Even when you can't figure out a way to do something, God can take whatever you are and can produce something that's absolutely, literally impossible. And He can change your life and the lives of those that are around you. I don't have the time, but I would like someday, if God allows me to live long enough, to tell the rest of the story, the lives that were affected by this, the tears that were there, the situations that happened that made it look even more impossible. But God has been through it all and with it all. And I love you, and I am so glad that I got to see the power and the strength of God Almighty in my old age. God bless you all.